I'm a resident of Waltham, and in the past, I have tried to regularize an ADU in my basement, and despite 5 attendances at the Zoning Board of Appeal, thousands of dollars in legal fees, I failed to regularize it because the city of Waltham is dead against any ADUs being built. In the last 20 years, only 3 ADU permits have been issued.
781 News Debrief. I'm your host, Jamie. I'm here with Tom and Saul. Say hi.
Hello.
Um, so we are covering news on Waltham City Council here in Waltham, Massachusetts, and we are going to be covering the new committee assignments for this year. First off, not a lot of change on committees. I'll put up a list of them here, but for Public Works, Public Safety, we've got Randy LeBlanc chairing the committee. License and Franchises, it's Carlos Vidal yet again. And Finance is Anthony LaFauci. Veteran Services is Sean Durkee. Long-Term Debt is Kathleen McMiniman. And Economic and Community Development is Paul Brasco. With Ordinances and Rules is still Kathy Ann Harris. Not much of note change there, other than on Ordinance and Rules, Bill Hanley swapped out for Randy LeBlanc. Any other thoughts, guys?
I am an on-record Randy LeBlanc hater. He is smart and uses his knowledge to obfuscate and make things more confusing for others. I consider that combination just make him a crank. I'm not too sad that he's off of Ordinance and Rules. Sad to see how Bill Hanley does. Yeah, because as mentioned in previous episodes, Randy was the one responsible for like 2 poison pills attempted to add to the new ADU ordinance, which is a minimum building size and a unnecessary requirement for utility connections, both of which are against state regulations, not allowed to be implemented. Yeah, I'm not sad he's gone from Ordinance and Rules, and I'm hopeful that Bill Hanley is an improvement.
We in the first couple of weeks this year, we had the second and third reading for the MBTA Communities Act. So the city was technically out of like the time limit last year for getting it fully approved, but they had spoken with the state and told them they'd be getting the final approval done ASAP this year, and that's looks like what they did.
So in summary, the MBTA Communities Act was a mediocre plan, not nearly as bad as it could have been, and Waltham is in compliance with state law, so it's not horrible. It's not great either. It specifically avoided parcels of land where developers wanted to convert their half-empty offices into housing, which is a little bit disappointing. And 4-unit buildings are not particularly feasible to develop at scale on large lots. But regardless, Waltham is doing something, which is better than nothing. Parking minimums down to 1 spot per unit is much more in line with Waltham resident needs than 2 spots per unit. So that's a big win on that front as well. And optimistic we'll see just a little bit of housing as a result of the MBTA Communities Act. So not great, not horrible. Mediocre job for Waltham. And it's certainly better than certain NIMBYs on council and the mayor's office would have preferred. So yeah, it's something.
Yeah, they all seem very disappointed that they would have to even allow for what they did allow for. So
Yeah. And they all want really big credit for doing the bare minimum. They want really big credit for not breaking the law. So I do want it on the record. Congrats, City Council. You didn't break state law. They really wanted credit for that. So specifically Paul Katz. Paul Katz, this is me giving you credit. You didn't break the law.
And tangentially related, this has happened in like one of the early February meetings, but Randy Mullen, the fire chief, was into finance talking about how they were just sort of getting notified by the state that if we weren't in compliance, that grants might start to get withheld. So that stuff that it seems like the state is actually planning on taking action on this type of thing. So
yeah, 100%.
State from the governor. It's interesting because they bring up the MBTA communities law, and they reference that uh, no community is being denied a fire safety grant for not being in compliance at this time, which is interesting. I don't know, I didn't know that that would play a role in this sort of grant.
So this grant funding opportunity came out in, it was September, October. The funding with the rules for it, if you will, they changed them again in October. We applied for it, and then right before we got this grant, so January, right before January 17th, I don't have the date, the state actually came out and said that if you were not an MBTA commuter in compliance with that act, you were not going to get funding. And that there was some pushback at the state level, and they quickly amended that to not affect this grant. But they certainly did threaten it, and if this grant is to be renewed next year, and I don't know how that's done at the state level, this has been a 5-year program, I believe, and this is the final year of it. So all these goods and services have to be purchased and delivered and paid for by June 30th of this year. Mm-hmm. If the state refunds this, there's a potential that in the funding application, you'll have to be in compliance with that law.
Interesting. I never, the first thing I wouldn't think of the MBTA community law would have any sort of say in our grant when it comes to, but it seems like at one point it did, it eventually didn't, but it might come back again. In a way, I'm kind of glad that we as a city will be in compliance with this. So therefore, if this grant continues to be available, then I think that's a good thing.
Did you want to cover ADUs, Tom?
Yes. So the big news is that first off, the state has finalized its ADU regulations, which basically dictates, last year the state passed a law which requires ADUs, accessory dwelling units, tiny homes to be allowed to be built on all land in the state that is zoned for single family homes. So that means if you live on land where a single family home can be built, it is legally protected that if you wanted to, you could add an additional tiny home to your lot, which is great. It's a great way to add gentle density. And the final state regulations that Massachusetts published on February 2nd, so they took effect at the beginning of this week. Those new state regulations basically enforce what they had previously said they were going to enforce. Plus, it adds protections for, even if your building is non-conforming or on a non-conforming lot, you're still allowed to build an ADU, and then those ADUs are not allowed to be restricted any more than single-family homes are restricted, or also accessory buildings are limited. Which is to say, often in Waltham, you have to have 20-foot setbacks for your single-family home, but a garage can be put 5 feet from the lot line. Waltham, the new state regulations ensure that, that garage 5 feet from the lot line, an ADU can also be 5 feet from the lot line, which is really good because a very common ADU scheme is, a garage to ADU conversion or, building an ADU on top of a garage. So a lot of really good protections in the final state regulations. So that's on the state side. And then at the local level, Waltham has announced a public hearing for new ADU zoning because Waltham wants to bring their zoning code into compliance with state law, which is good because Waltham's existing zoning code is very bad. It makes it incredibly hard to build ADUs and it will no longer be applicable. So the big news is that Waltham's new public hearing for new zoning is happening on Monday, February 24th in the City Council chambers at 7:30 p.m. So if you're available to speak in favor of accessory dwelling units, I highly encourage you to attend. And if you want to learn more about Waltham's specific plan to legalize accessory dwelling units, I highly recommend you also attend the info session that Waltham Inclusive Neighborhoods is hosting on Saturday, February 15th at the library in the lecture hall at 3:30 p.m. This is particularly important because even though there are state protections for ADUs, Waltham's current zoning language tries to break those laws in a lot of ways. They're trying to unnecessarily require parking spots where they're not allowed to, Waltham's also trying to prohibit tiny ADUs. There's a limit to how small they can be in Waltham's current zoning or in their proposed zoning. They're trying to require costly utility connections, which are separate from the principal dwelling unit, which shouldn't be allowed. That's an added cost where, if the property owner doesn't want to charge their tenant separately for sewer and water, they aren't required by state law to pay for a separate utility connection. Waltham's also trying to limit ADUs to only being added to single family homes, which is not allowed according to state law. If your property is a duplex or a threeplex or a fourplex or anything else, you can still add one additional dwelling unit to that property if you want, per state law. Waltham is not allowed to block that. There are one or two other things. Waltham's trying to implement a 1-story height limit to ADUs when they're not allowed to do that. If you want to build a second floor ADU on top of your garage, or if you want to build a 3rd-story ADU in your attic, if it's legal under the underlying zoning for a single family home or other principal dwelling, Waltham's not allowed to block that. So there are a lot of ways in which Waltham's proposed zoning is an anti-ADU ordinance. And that's why it is so important that we have people show up, learn about the zoning, and speak in favor of ADUs at this public hearing. Because if Waltham does decide to break the law in any of these ways, that's bad, because that means new housing in Waltham will be denied, as it requires, people who want to build ADUs to go through an entire lawsuit process to forcefully overturn Waltham zoning. It's a lot easier if we just avoid that whole process in the first place.
From a practical point of view, if you are not in a single family home currently, if you're in a 2-family, 3-family, even if it's legally allowed, is that actually practical? Like, whom would the ADU belong to if you were in like a 2-unit or a 3-unit, like triple decker condo? Like, what are the actual logistics of that?
I mean, it would belong to a property owner, and in the case of condos where multiple people own a property, there is a condo deed, and so it would have to be negotiated into the condo deed. So it would have to happen with the consent of all owners of a property. But it's also extremely practical in Waltham specifically, because a very good recent example is last fall. There was a house in Southside Waltham that was a 3-unit building. It had been a 3-unit building for at least a few decades back. But at a certain point a few years ago, the property owner stopped leasing out their 3rd unit, and therefore they started getting taxed as a duplex. And then if you're not familiar with Waltham zoning laws, even though Southside is filled with 3-unit, 4-unit, 6-unit, 8-unit buildings, under zoning, everything larger than a duplex is illegal to build in Waltham. So whenever the landlord tried to, or I say that, I think the property owner lives there. So whenever the property owner, homeowner, whatever, however you want to call them, whenever they tried to start renting out their 3rd unit again in their house, the city said, nope, that violates zoning. Waltham is duplex only zoning. You are not allowed to have an occupancy permit for your currently existing 3rd unit in your building. ADUs, the state's ADU law will now legalize that 3rd unit. So Waltham, the ADU zoning at the state level will also help Waltham's multifamily communities to help re-legalize what Waltham City Council made illegal back in 1973 when they downzoned.
So an ADU need not even be physically detached from, it could be actually part of a building.
Yeah, so part of the state regulations is it prohibits municipalities such as Waltham to require an ADU is attached or detached.
Okay.
So a very common thing also is for ADUs to be carved out of an existing building, not necessarily added on. But if a homeowner wants to attach a separated ADU in their backyard, if they want to attach a new structure attached to their home, or if they just want to carve out a part of their existing home, all of these things are illegal under state law, and they can't be blocked by the city anymore.
As long as they be like building codes for like fire egress, etc.
Yes, yeah. An important distinction is building codes dictate how buildings are built. Zoning laws dictate what kind of housing is allowed to be built. So building code, which deals with safety, fire access, utilities, building code is still in full force. Neighborhoods are not becoming less safe. Housing is just as safe as it's always been. The only thing that's changing is the zoning laws, which basically prohibits affordable types of housing. Like affordable types of housing will be legal in this specific way again. But yeah, still has to comply with all the zoning, all the building codes that maintain safety.
We just discussed this and covered this in our last month's episode, but the city council is pretty transparently against any or is pretty transparently undermining any like reforms to this. There was a session, info session that I recorded as well about ADUs and uploaded. I'll link it here now. And one of the people who spoke from Waltham mentioned that, or had mentioned that the out of when he was getting his ADU built or trying to get his ADU built for his place, he found out that there had only been 3 that had been approved in the city in like 15 years. It's just that at the end of the day, you kind of have to look at what the outcomes are, no matter what the city councilors say that they actually like say that they're doing or want, and if their results of their actions are that nothing gets built, that's probably what they're trying to do.
I'm a resident of Waltham, and in the past, I have tried to regularize an ADU in my basement, and despite 5 attendances at the Zoning Board of Appeal, thousands of dollars in legal fees, I failed to regularize it because the city of Waltham is dead against any ADUs being built. In the last 20 years, only 3 ADU permits have been issued.
Yeah, and this Waltham resident who spoke at that meeting, the guy you're referencing, has also been trying to build his own ADU for years, and it has been impossible. Like he has been trying for, I think, over 5 years at this point, and it is required this state legislation where as of Sunday, he will finally have success. So yeah.
Yeah, so that was ADUs. There's a action plan for stretch codes. Do you want to talk about that as well?
Yeah, sure. So as was just mentioned, zoning codes dictate what kinds of housing are allowed to be built. Building codes dictate how housing is built and make sure it's built in a safe manner. And building codes are something that's handed down from the state. The state decides what the building codes will be, and then cities are forced to adopt what the state provides. Municipalities aren't allowed to pick and choose what safety regulations they think fit best for their community. And honestly, I'm personally a big fan of that. Waltham does not have the expertise to be managing what is and isn't safe construction. It's much better handled by larger bodies of professionals in the state. That being said, the state does sometimes hand down options from which cities can choose for their building code. And we call these stretch codes. Yes, basically they're options for cities that they can choose to adopt stricter building codes that are more energy efficient and climate friendly. And the reason we bring this up is because stretch codes are about to be back in front of city council. Mothers Out Front, which is a climate advocacy organization across Massachusetts and maybe beyond Massachusetts, they have a local chapter and they are advocating for Waltham to adopt stretch codes. This is something that was attempted 2 years ago in Waltham and was shot down. I think it was good old friend Randy LeBlanc who was quoted by saying fossil fuels aren't going away.
But now to have Massachusetts say we're going to do this, but the rest of the country is going to be like, great, more gas, more oil for us. We haven't really fixed the problem. And if you look around this room, obviously the people at home can't see it. By getting rid of fossil fuels, gas and electric, you're basically eliminating the engine for what controls everything. But basically everything in this room and everything that was used by people to get here depends on fossil fuels. So fossil fuels are not going away.
We're not adopting these stretch codes. So it was shot down 2 years ago, but 2 years later, we are trying again. Notably, this is the email I received from Mothers Out Front. They said that it will be the proposal to adopt stretch codes in Waltham will be introduced by Councillor Colleen Bradley MacArthur at the upcoming City Council meeting on February 10th at 7 p.m. So hopefully it will gain a more favorable review this time around. their request from others out front, specifically, I guess, through the email, is to, if you're available to attend the city council meeting on February 10th in support of stretch codes, highly encourage you to attend. And also please email your city councilor as well to opt in to these specialized stretch codes, which are more climate friendly. I think that the trade-offs of the stretch codes are, these are higher requirements. Buildings must not necessarily be electrified, but easily electrifiable, meaning it's not banning gas stoves or anything, but it does need to make it a lot easier to install electric stoves, if that's your choice. The trade-offs are kind of that, it'll make the initial building of housing more expensive, but also in the long term, it lowers utility costs to make it more affordable. So a little bit of pros and cons. I think overall a good thing, especially because generally the primary barrier to housing and more affordable housing in Waltham is not the building codes. The primary barrier is the fact that it's straight up illegal. So I think this is more or less a good thing overall, definitely for the climate. And I think, it's pretty cost neutral for affordability.
Looking forward to seeing a bunch of people there in a week. So, moving on. The dumpster ordinance that we talked about last year is back and was discussed this year. And it had its first reading successfully with only a handful of people voting against it. And it's kind of the usual suspects at this point, but it was Brasco who was specifically calling out that the city wouldn't have to pay the dumpster or the fee levied by the dumpster ordinance, which then Logan pointed out that would be basically the city taking money from one pocket to put into another. So,
and one special thing is, like always we do, this ordinance, dumpsters which are located on or serving the city of Waltham and the Waltham Housing Authority property, which some might argue might be the worst dumpsters in the city, are overflowing, and who are we going to pay overtime to unlock the gate, come in? But we're even exempt from the $100 fee when we probably have a significant amount of dumpsters throughout the city of Waltham. We're kind of like Congress. We make you have health care, but we don't take the same kind of health care. It's kind of that way. You impose an ordinance and a fee on people and businesses. However, you don't really want to deal with it on your own level. And I understand, again, this has to do with restaurants, food sources. You show me the other business communities where rats are climbing up and getting into the dumpster and eating oil cans and rubber tires, and I'll be willing to vote for this in a second. But we don't even impose the fee on ourselves. Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Logan, third time around.
Okay, let me restate, because we're not focusing on a particular industry, because there can be food in any dumpster. All right, as I said, if they have a break room, they have employees eat lunch, they don't finish lunch, it goes in the wastebasket goes in the dumpster. So you can have food in any dumpster. And as far as exempting the city from a fee, so how's that going to work? The city will charge itself a fee, so it'll take the money out of one pocket and put it in the other. I move the question.
The other point that was made was that because they see the issue as being only the restaurant, or primarily the restaurants for the rats, that this would then be causing a bunch of businesses that aren't hosting rats to be having to pay a $100 fee per dumpster. The examples given were Florist by Brasco and like auto shops. But then Logan pointed out that like most of these places have employees who are probably going to be throwing away trash in the dumpster.
It's more difficult to operate a business. Understood that we need to address the problem. But if the problem's in Ward 8 and Ward 9, we shouldn't be penalizing the people up on Bear Hill Road, the people in Warrendale, the auto bodies, the flower shops, this, that. Everybody will now be affected by this ordinance.
There's been some talk here about food dumpsters versus non-food dumpsters. The other day, the city put out an advisory about cardboard and why it should be cut up and put into your recycling bin so that the cover closes. And it was because rats use cardboard as nesting material. They will nest in the cardboard or take the cardboard and use it as nesting material. So there you have a situation where, you know, and you go to any business, any dumpster, you're going to find cardboard in there. And the other thing is, even if a business isn't a food business, it's not a restaurant or something like that, or a grocery store, right? Go into the business. Do they have a break room? Do the employees have lunch? What do they do if they don't eat their whole lunch? It goes into the wastebasket. Where's the wastebasket go? Gets dumped in the dumpster. Guess what? Now there's food in the dumpster. So I'd be willing to bet that at most of these places, if you wanted to do a little dumpster diving, even though that's not primarily what that business is, you're going to find at least a sandwich in that dumpster. And let me tell you, sandwich will feed a few rats. So kind of does away with that argument. Thank you.
That had its, like I said, that had its first reading, so we can expect 2 more of those and maybe a little more debate. And I believe it went to, and then it'll go to the health department for enforcement. So,
And I'm not super familiar with the dumpster ordinance. You said there's a fee associated, so is it basically restaurant owners have to keep their dumpster area clean, and if it's not clean, they have to pay a fine for it to be cleaned up, or
so the way that this works is the companies that are handling the dumpsters would be getting asked to pay a fee to the city per dumpster of $100, and that would be so that they
per year, correct?
per year, yeah.
Okay.
And that would be basically so that they'd be paying that fee to get like a license or something to be operating the dumpster in the city, such that then the health department would have something to enforce, basically restricting that license to operate the dumpster. The points being made were basically this is just going to immediately get passed on to the consumer, or sort of passed on to the companies that are running the dumpsters. And that because they're now requiring like, you know, a fee for being able to operate the dumpster, this would give the health department means to say that, like, you know, okay, well, if you don't have X, Y, and Z done around the dumpster, then you're not be allowed to operate it. Which there was some pushback to, because, like, you know, having fencing around a dumpster doesn't necessarily make it more immune to rats. It makes it easier for the rats to access. So it sounds like it's still going to be under discussion, and there was still time for people to speak up about it. So I'm gonna have to take a look and see what happens or how other cities and towns handle that, though. So all right. Moving on. Councilor Logan and Harris brought forward a resolution for equipping school buses with cameras. And these cameras would only be operating when the bus's stop sign arm is out, to sort of facilitate catching people who are driving by when in violation of that stop sign. This was introduced mid-January, and they're basically in the process of renegotiating the contract with the school bus companies, and the city council seems to be trying to sort of get this thing passed ASAP to then get this implemented so that the companies that the school is contracting the buses from could have that in this contract this year. And to that end, the people from the school department were asked to attend next ordinance and rules. So I'll be there for that.
So in terms of timing, so this is actually in reaction to a state law. So up until just recently, our January or the end of December, cameras were not allowed at all for traffic enforcement. The state, I don't remember offhand which department, but it's part of the state legislature, the end of the 2024 session, allowed the use of camera enforcement for school buses specifically, to just school buses. There was a pilot program that I think PBD in Salem had done. There were a couple of videos that we can link to where they had these cameras just for, not for issuing citations, but just for capturing how many drivers passed school buses. And just to be clear, for anyone that does not know the law, if a school bus is stopped and has its stop arm out, okay, traffic in both directions must stop, okay, not just the direction the bus is going in. It's a very sensible law. I mean, just the other day I was on an early morning walk. There were a couple of kids running to catch their school bus, just darting across to make sure they get their bus. As Logan had pointed out at the council the other day, like a driver that like wantonly just passes a school bus with its stop sign outstretched is a pretty blatant uh, violator of basic road safety and is likely to be reckless in other driving situations also. This wouldn't be automated camera enforcement. As I understand it, so the camera would be mounted to the stop sign that swings out when the bus is stopped picking up or discharging or dropping off kids. It would be recording at that moment. Any footage can then be reviewed by the local police department, so the Waltham Police Department. And as long as the plate was identifiable, then the police department could issue a citation. It wouldn't be a moving violation, and it wouldn't count against the driver's license points. Um, but it would be if I don't know offhand what the dollar amount is, and whether or not it scales like based on whether like it's the first or second or third violation. I also don't know like what share the city gets versus what share like the um school bus operator gets.
They
But the
did
point is
discuss,
the driver can face consequences now for driving past a stopped school bus where previously they could not based off of video evidence.
they did discuss making some sort of seeing if they could find a way to make the fees or whatever they charge for this get to be used to then pay for the cost of equipping the buses. So, and there have been sort of several bus crashes this month as well, but none of them would have been necessarily helped by the presence of these cameras.
Yeah, there have been three crashes now at the intersection of Lexington and Beaver Streets in the past 2.5 or 3 weeks. The first one was the most serious, a bus carrying kids to do a language school, which used to be um, at the old South Junior High, the rec center, 510 Moody, moved to the old high school when the new high school opened this school year. A bus was driving north on Lexington Street. That intersection does have a protected left turn from southbound Lexington onto Beaver Street. And then when that protected arrow goes away, it just turns into a solid green, meaning yield to drivers going north. A um, a van driver, REM, I believe, which is a licensed operator for I think patients needing mobility assistance, elderly residents. I don't think there was anyone in that van, but that van driver basically cut off the school bus. The van flipped over, and 6 kids ended up being sent to the hospital, I think, with nothing serious, but still pretty traumatic to have your elementary school kids being sent to the hospital on a school morning.
Yeah.
There were 2 other crashes at that intersection within the next week or two. One of them involved a school van, so a van that like serves as a school bus. There were no students on board at the time, so that's a pretty problematic intersection that hopefully the traffic commission will take up at its next meeting in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm not confident there's any kind of hardware or technological solutions for something like that other
Yeah,
than
it's just it's a bad intersection, period. It's designed as a highway interchange, like a lot of Lexington Street is. It's got basically ramps onto Beaver Street and off of Beaver Street onto Lexington. It's got
two
two
slip lanes.
northbound lanes when 2 are not needed right there. It's the speed limit is either 30 or 35. Drivers might be going faster than that. So just combine that with already distracted drivers, and it's just a setup for these sorts of crashes. The
Yep.
fact that 3 of them happened in 2 weeks is somewhat of a coincidence, but it's not a coincidence that crashes are happening at this intersection on Lexington Street.
Yeah, and I mean, like this part of this is that we did just move more students sort of north of the river up to the high school area.
Yeah,
There's now significantly more traffic going there.
yeah, dual language does draw a lot of its student body from the south side. So a lot more students that previously would have been walking within walking distance of 510 Moody are now on um, buses to and from the old high school each morning and afternoon. Um, But again, this is independent of the bus camera resolution. Buses might have their own cameras recording either the outside or inside. But just the coincidence that the same time span that this ordinance was introduced by Logan and Harris, this school bus crash happened at the beginning of January.
Anyway, so moving on, I believe it was Committee of the Whole. There was a Councilor Brasco took a moment to sort of thank the police
No, it
for
was the full
full
committee.
council?
Yeah, it was the full
Yeah.
council.
Okay. So yeah, the full
It was
council.
it was the end of the last full council session.
It's right on the 27th. I was watching remotely. The Councilor Brasco took a moment to thank the Waltham Police Department for speedily recovering one of his cars for his funeral company that had been left idling for a concerning amount of time, apparently. And I'll play the clip here, but you can hear the dog whistle.
At 2 p.m. this afternoon, one of my vehicles from the funeral home was stolen in the middle of in the middle of my funeral, and taken by one of the finer Southside constituents who stole the vehicle out of in front of the funeral home and proceeded to take off.
So then, Saul, you posted this on Facebook and provoked a pretty significant response.
Yeah. Brasco is not in a great position to like be antagonizing and disparaging constituents. Like his last two elections, when he lost in 2021, it was by about 15 votes. And when he won his at-large seat at the last council election in 2023, that was where there was a field of about a dozen at-large candidates. Only about 100 votes separated him from the top non-at-large winner. So his base is pretty precarious. So he's not the best in the best position to be making comments about offhand comments about a large part of the city.
Yeah.
So we'll
It,
see
like,
if that has
does
any
represent them.
ramifications come this year's council election.
Yeah. Hopefully there'll be some political hay made of this, because it's not a great look to be talking that way about your own constituents. I mean,
And your neighbor, and your business neighbor.
yeah.
His family business has been on the south side for decades.
Yep. And it even got WCAC coverage.
I will say it's very funny. Yeah, Saul posting about Paul Brasco's comment about Southsiders I do personally believe is what drove WACAC to reporting on this topic.
Right.
Like the power of posting can drive news cycles, just as inspiration for anyone if there's issues you care
Yeah,
about.
and just the matter in which the Waltham Channel posted it like about 4 days after the fact. Like if you look at the police log for January, there were several other stolen cars roughly around the same time period. Like none of them got the attention. So to devote a whole article and Facebook post to 2 minutes of Brasco speaking out of line.
Because of you,
Yeah.
Saul. Because of you.
And this wasn't on the council agenda. Like Brasco just brought this up at the very end, right before someone was going to make a motion to adjourn.
Yeah. I think the most interesting thing to come out of this whole story, though, is the fact that Brasco's hearse, the article made a note to mention that it's valued at $5,000.
Yeah, it's
which
a
is a lot less than I thought.
2011 Grand Marquis or something.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna lie, $5,000 is a lot less than I thought a hearse would be valued at. That was the main takeaway for me. I was really
Yeah, I
surprised.
don't know I don't think it was for hearse. I think it was just a vehicle that was going to be part of the procession to Calvary Cemetery.
Oh, okay.
I thought it was just funny that they left the thing idling with the keys in the ignition.
Also very funny, which I think you can point out was technically breaking the law, right?
Yeah, I think state law is you can only idle for most 5 minutes outside of any extenuating circumstances, and keeping the interior of the car warm is not one of those extenuating circumstances.
Yeah.
Just
And now we have collectively devoted more time than Brasco himself spoke on the council floor earlier this week. So,
Yeah, I think that the car was stolen for a grand total of 28 minutes or
yeah.
something. So yeah, I think more air has been spent talking about it at this point.
Yes, the two Waltham officers that were on detail on Lexington Street stopped traffic and caused a traffic jam so that this car could be apprehended in the TJ Maxx shopping center on North Lexington Street.
We did it. We saved the $5,000 hearse.
So,
Or $5,000 arbitrarily sized funerary vehicle. Not necessarily.
So anyway, this has been a short month for council news. We'll be back in February. So or possibly early March, depending on when I get together with editing it. Thanks, guys, and
Okay.
bye.
take
Thank
care.
you all. Bye.